Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm joined by Lindsay Bruce, former SAS, and you are now a coach for men over 40 or 40 and over, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not completely, it's not strictly just men over 40. That's just that's a guideline.
Yeah.
It's a guideline to keep out non-fits, essentially.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's typically men over 40, but there are younger men.
Yeah.
That have
Yeah, and then you've also started the Modern Warrior project. That's another one of your
So that's what it's all about.
things.
That's pretty much.
Yeah. And that stemmed from being in the forces.
Not necessarily, no.
No.
I mean, I had no idea when I left the military that I was going to be doing what I'm doing today.
Okay.
It was just the way things unfolded.
Yeah. So going back sort of to the beginning, like what brought you into the military?
Well, I mean, I joined when I was 17. Come from a very strong military family history. So my dad was in the army. He was kind of like the trailblazer though. So there wasn't really any military in the bloodline before that. So my dad was originally from Skye. So he was brought up in the Isle of Skye, and he just decided when he was 15 years old to move to Glasgow. So he went to the Big Smoke and didn't have a job, didn't have any sort of career aspirations. He just wanted to get out of the reclusive sort of environment he was in. Went to Glasgow, and I think it was about 3 or 4 years later, they actually joined the army because he didn't really have a career or anything to do. So he walked past the careers office one day, thought, I'll give that a go. And that was the beginning of it. So he joined, and then his two brothers also joined. And then obviously, later on in life, I've got two older brothers as well. So they're like 7 and 9 years older respectively. And my oldest brother followed suit, and then it just was a chain reaction then. And I was the last one to sort of, not the last one, my nephew's also in the forces today as well. So he was the next after that. So a few generations worth.
Yeah.
But, for me personally, I was influenced a lot by my dad, my brothers. So it was kind of a natural progression, but I did go through a phase when I was a teenager that I wanted to do something different. I just wasn't sure what it was. And as it just happened, something just told me that the military was the right thing for me as well. I grew up in Fort William, which was a bit of a one-horse town. Beautiful place, but, there aren't many career aspirations, especially if you didn't do very well at school. So I did very badly at school. It ended up being the best thing that happened to me because of what I did. Everything happens for a reason. I think nothing that's for you will go by you. And so I just, I dropped out of school at 15, didn't set any exams, hence getting no qualifications, and then joined at 17. And that was kind of just like because, at the time I just didn't really have anything that I wanted to do as a career. I didn't have any qualifications, wasn't going to go to university. I had a job, but I knew it wasn't for me for the long term because I thought, there's more in me. I need to get out of the town and I need to explore. So that was the beginning of it, really. That's how it all started.
Yeah. So is it, you have the SAS and then the SBS?
Yeah, within the Special Forces Group,
Yeah. So is it like the Navy and sort of your normal like Marine kind of?
Yeah, the maritime side of things. So you get Navy, the Marines are under the Navy umbrella. So the Royal Navy, the SBS should have say recruit from the Royal Navy.
Okay.
And the SAS recruit from the Army.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty much,
So what made you, like, obviously you're in the military, like what made you go up for selection to get into the SAS?
It was just one of those things. I remember one particular day, basic training, it was like first week of basic training, a few days into it, and a good friend of mine now, a guy called Ewan Ross, who's now he was actually quite an accomplished actor. He was my platoon commander when I joined the army, and we had this lesson one day, and when we were learning all about the different factions within the army, it's just basic recruit stuff, and we got given this presentation, and it was about the different elements of the army, the Med Corps, the PT Corps, the engineers, everyone. And the last slide, it was viewfoils back then, so that's going back a bit. I'm showing my age a bit there, but he put up this last viewfoil, and it was a cap badge of the SAS. Now I'd kind of been obsessed with this when I was a kid because of the film Who Dares Wins. So I remember one Christmas, I think it was like 1984, 1985, something like that, and I was given the action man figure of the Iranian embassy, you know, with all the black kit on, the respirator and all that sort of stuff. And I distinctly remember that, and I just thought, this is awesome. I watched the movie Who Dares Wins, and I was obsessed with it, right? So that was kind of my vision of the SAS, because that was everyone's vision of the SAS then, because it wasn't until they hit the public eye, you know, in the 5th of May 1980, that was with the Iranian embassy siege, that everyone then knew about the SAS, because it was, you know, live on TV of these men in black storming through the Iranian embassy. So it very much put the regiment on the map. Before that, it was kind of an unknown. And so this was one of those things that I had in my mind from a very young age. And, you know, kids go up and they want to be an astronaut, they want to be a fireman. You know, everyone at a young age, especially below the age of 10, you've got massive aspirations of doing something spectacular.
Yeah.
That tends to wane off as people go older. It's just one of those things that the belief systems change, and you start to have less belief in or you get more realistic, should we say. So before you know it, instead of wanting to be an astronaut or a professional footballer, you just end up wanting a job to earn money. Anyway, so this was kind of my early influence in my mind. So when I joined the army, they were sat in this lesson, and the last slide they came up with is this regiment cap badge, the winged dagger. And the platoon commander, Ewan, he said, is there anyone in this room, bear in mind there's about 40 of us in this room at the time, is there anyone in this room who would ever see themselves having aspirations to join the Special Air Service Regiment? This is the pinnacle of the British Army. It's the pinnacle of the Special Forces within the world, essentially. And me and my one friend, Dougie, we were the only two to put our hands up. And I ended up joining a few years later. So it was kind of weird how that worked out. But we had different career paths. You know, Dougie didn't join. He ended up leaving the army. But I always found it strange that there was only two of us within 40, out of 40 people that had actually said, yeah, I'd go for that.
Yeah.
And I followed through and did it. So yeah, it was something I'm proud of.
Yeah, no, that's crazy, because the success rate from the beginning of selection to the end, do you know sort of roughly what that is?
Changes, but on average, I think it's about, I think it's around 8%, maybe less, 7-8%, maybe.
That make it through?
7 or 8% that make it through, yeah. They get badged at the end. So you could be talking about maybe 200 to 250 people, maybe 8 to 12 on average. That was always kind of like the rule on average. I think my selection had a few more. There was quite a high percentage pass rate. I think there was like 18. That was considered high at the time. And I think there was probably 250 started, you know.
When you sort of like passed selection, was it what you expected when you like, right, I'm in the SAS now?
It was really bizarre. It was really surreal. I think, and I honestly think that, you know, you see all these stories of young people becoming famous.
Yeah.
Your Justin Biebers and your Robbie Williams back in the day. I recently watched a Robbie Williams documentary, and it really resonated with me. A completely different, path of life, obviously, but the key fundamentals within that whole journey for him, the resonance was quite high, because the real message there is that when you get a lot of things that happen to you too young, and you're not at the stage where you're mature enough to deal with it, or you don't have the right support mechanisms around, or you're allowed to have a free rein, shit can go pretty wrong pretty quickly. And there was a few episodes in my career, in my life, that could have made things go sideways pretty quickly, because I wasn't mature enough to handle it. Because when I first got into the regiment, you know, you kind of have to have an ego to do that anyway. And it just so happened my ego was rather large at the time. I was this kid from school who hadn't had any qualifications, so I lacked confidence as a child. I didn't have confidence with girls at school when I was really young. I looked really young, so I matured a bit later. So when I joined the army, I was one of the guys at the sinks in the mornings, where I was just putting shaving foam in my face and running a razor. I could have left the cap on, and it still wouldn't have made a difference, you know. I didn't have any facial hair when I joined the army, so I looked really young. And so you had this massive transition. Within about 5 years, I'd gone from drop out of school, decided I was going to join the army, did pretty well, was always physically fit, took to it like a duck to water for the most part. So I had a very early high level of success in the military. And so when I joined the regiment, that just put it was almost like putting a turbocharger on the ego and sending it to space. So I then was in this squadron full of big hairy arse men. Initially a very intimidating environment, but also a welcoming environment. So then before long, you know, I was downtown. I was larging it downtown. I thought I was the cat's pajamas. I was drinking a lot of alcohol. It all went to my head. And with that, it's always a matter of time before the wheels start to fall off. So I kind of lost track for a little bit within my army career in the special forces, where I drank too much. I got on with the job. I always did well at the job, but I had a lot of fragility surrounding me at the time. So it was a bit of a wake up call when, you know, a couple of things happened that could have resulted in me being kicked out, actually. And it was all to do with social stuff.
Yeah.
Getting pissed, turn up at the gate when I should have been on duty or should have been on standby 30 minutes, and I was downtown getting shit faced, and then getting pulled up for it. And it wasn't, you know, no one shouts at you. You know, it's not like the regular army when you get beasted and you get shouted at and you get thrown in jail. This was one of those psychological approaches of, I'm extremely disappointed in you. You know, you've let us down. That hurts. So there's a couple of things that happened, and I ended up kind of toeing the line then and getting my head down, and I sorted that out. But there was a short episode where I would say that I started to sort of lose my direction a little bit, and it was because of the ego, because it got to my head.
Yeah. What was like the point of realization? Obviously, like with like the silent judgment always from the people around you.
Yeah, it wasn't sort of silent judgment. It was just more like people will tell you how it is.
Okay, straight talking.
People straight talking. There's a lot of transparency, a lot of this is how it is. You know, there's no point in beating around the bush. It's a very grown up environment. I mean, I had a great regimental career. Don't get me wrong. There was just a little blip within that probably the first year of being there that I would say that it went to my head a little bit, and I almost learned the hard way. So thankfully, I got through that.
Because how long were you in the SAS for?
6 years.
6 years, and then when you left, was it like that was clear cut? Like you didn't have anything else to do with the military? It was just sort of like that was it.
No, because I think in life, you know, you make decisions, then you make it a right one. I think there are people. I think there are certainly people in all areas of the services that they can't seem to let go of it, and they cling on to it for dear life, even when they leave, and it just ends up holding you back for other things. So you've almost got to, you know, close one door before you can then open other ones properly.
Yeah, you hear about it. People who really struggle to like normalize back into civilian life.
Yeah.
From being in the forces for ages. And there's a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche. I'm not sure if you heard of this, and it's like, under conditions of peace, the warlike man attacks himself. Yeah. And I don't know if you've like know of anyone who's like in that scenario where they just can't. Yeah. Were you in that?
Yeah. I can really relate to that now.
And what got you through? Like what helped you normalize a bit?
Still going through it.
Still going through it.
I think I'm through it now, but it's very recently, yeah.
Yeah. So how long ago was it that you left the army?
It was quite a long time ago. I mean, I left back in 2005.
2005?
Maybe 2006.
So a good like 15 years almost.
Yeah, it was more than that. It was like more like 17, 18 years ago, that I left. And you know, there's been many episodes in my life after the army. That was one episode, you know, it was a chapter. Yeah. And I don't tend to hang on to it. I mean, I can definitely, I mean, we're sat here now partly because I was in the SAS, right? So it kind of put my profile on the map. Yeah. When it comes to things like my coaching and whatnot, but people focus on the wrong things. You know, I've done more as a coach and learned more about human behavior way after I left the military, more so than I did when I was in it. Yeah. You know, the reality was, you know, when I left the military at 29, I was still very immature. I think a lot of men are. Women tend to grow up faster than men. A lot of men grow up faster than other men, but I think for me personally, I still hadn't matured properly at the age of 29 when I left the SAS. So people get this impression that you're in the SAS and it's almost like you've got the Wi-Fi passcode to life and you know everything. It's a load of bullshit. Yeah. You know, I'll be the first to admit that. You know, I've done very idiotic things post-regiment days that I'm not proud of. And I think it's only probably since what am I now? I'm 46 now. It's probably only since I was about 42 that I think I started to grow up properly. Yeah. That's the truth.
Yeah.
And I do feel like I've grown up properly now. I feel like a man now, and I feel like I've got a lot of wisdom, and I feel like I am grown up. But it'll never stop. The learning never stops. The development never stops. That's one thing you got to be humble about and go, yeah, I never know more. I never know everything. I know. In fact, the more you know, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah,
That's
100%.
as well.
I used to be in the exact same place where, in my industry, like I was good. I'm not afraid to admit I was.
Which industry
good.
was that?
Tree work, so like climbing trees and like working on trees.
Yeah.
Like I was good at climbing, and I knew I was. But then along with that comes the ego, and then you have other people, and they're like, "Have you done it this way?" I'm like, "Nah, you don't know what you're on about, mate." Like you kind of get like that. Like people I know everything. Yeah. And then the older you get, and like I run a business now, and I have done for the past 6 years.
Right.
It just like they're actually trying to help. They're not trying to put you down. And you sort of drop your ego, drop your pride a little bit. And then you realize like, oh, do you know what? I didn't actually know a lot of stuff. And yeah, it's that ego thinking that you know it all.
It's like you got to make it your friend and not your foe.
Yeah. And I think obviously you are into the medicinal sort of like plant-based sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Did that help with sort of letting go of the army and stuff like that?
Still processing it now because I only came back last week. Well, what are we on? What day is it now? Tuesday. So
yeah,
I only came back from Ecuador on Saturday, and I'd been away on a 2-week plant medicine retreat in Ecuador. So
nice.
It's still very fresh.
Yeah,
and yeah, it was. To say it was profound would be a massive understatement. It was huge. Yeah.
So what actually got you into that?
It was. I'd say going back a few years ago now, probably 4 years, I would say. I saw something on a documentary or a podcast. I forget the first place that I heard about it, but I first learned about ayahuasca. Now, I'd obviously been like everybody, I grew up in the 90s. I had never taken anything. I was never a recreational drug user. I drank alcohol. That was it. There's a few, me and my mates, there was a few of us that just didn't go near drugs. And that's quite rare, having grown up in the 90s with the rave days, right?
Yeah.
So I never had any experience, but I had a belief and a perception around drugs, which was very much from the angle of all drugs are bad. And I categorized things like mushrooms, LSD, MDMA, all this sort of recreational stuff that people might have used back in the day. I coupled that with everything else like cocaine and hard drugs. So I just thought drugs were categorized into one channel, and I just was always taught that drugs are bad. My dad was kind of like a bit of an exception to that, was that he used to like smoking cannabis. This is certainly like after his army days. I think it was probably one of the best things he could have done. He probably should have switched alcohol for cannabis and just done the cannabis. But he was like running on all systems. So alcohol was his biggest downfall. But and really, when you think about it, alcohol is without doubt the worst drug out there.
Yeah,
it fucks up so many things. The amount of mistakes I've made with alcohol, the amount of things I've almost lost through alcohol, it really is damaging stuff. So I had this perception of all drugs, as I call them. I don't term them as drugs now. I think there's a point where it becomes drugs, and there's a point where it's medicine and it's healing. Now that I have a full understanding of it, but I would never have thought that I'd have taken even mushrooms or and it's certainly not anything. I didn't even know what ayahuasca was, but I think going back a few years ago, I first learned about ayahuasca. Fast forward a couple of years after that, when there were podcasts started, like the Huberman Lab podcast with Andrew Huberman, which is a great podcast. There was Joe Rogan, he goes on about it a lot. He's very big on psychedelics.
Yeah.
And I started to hear this. It's a bit like when you want to buy a black BMW that no one has, and all of a sudden you start seeing them everywhere. It was like that, because you're conscious about it. Your conscious level raises, and you start being more open to the information. So you then start hearing it everywhere, seeing it everywhere. It just starts to pop up all over the place. So this was something that became a regular little bit of a message in my mind. I started hearing about plant medicine all the time. So initially for me, because I had a huge problem with focusing when I was a kid at school. So going back as far as I can remember, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, I always remember having a problem with focusing for more than a few minutes. I remember one particular occasion in school when I was about 6 years old. The teacher, bless her, she let me paint. I always remember this picture of a picture of the night sky with stars, and it was a flying unicorn. And it took me ages to do it, but it was quite a big piece of artwork, and it ended up going in the canteen wall. You know, I distinctly remember that. But thinking back to the reason why I was doing that is because I couldn't concentrate on any of the normal school curriculum. I was just away with the fairies. You know, I would gaze into space, and I was very creative, always very creative. But my mind was always working overtime. It was always in overdrive. So my creativity had to be sort of expressed, and that's why she let me paint, and all the other kids were like, "Oh, we're so jealous, you know, you're getting to paint, and we're having to do all the schoolwork." Even at 6 years old, I remember that, and I was all proud of myself because everyone was like envious of how good I could paint. I was a very good artist, and you know, still not too bad today, but I don't do it as much now. But anyway, this then continued all through my school career. Then obviously adolescence kicks in, hormones you can go out of control, and there you get a whole new realm of fucking, you know, complexities at that point. So a combination of the lack of focus, adolescence, develops a certain belief system that then gives you a picture and a perception about yourself. Then go in the military, and then all of a sudden the ego gets catapulted to the stratosphere because I now find something I'm actually good at, and I let it go to my head. So the focus thing was always still there. Even through my army career, I always felt like, even though I'd joined the SAS, even though I could get stuff done, I always use this expression, it was almost like I was going through life with a handbrake on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, fuck, I just feel like something was weighing me down all the time. Everything was a struggle. So on the surface, people would go, "Oh yeah, he's achieved this, he's achieved that." In my mind, I wasn't really content or happy with myself or my efforts. You know, although I'd done things that was like, I could be so much more efficient if I could just get this fucking weight off my back. If I could stop procrastinating, if I could stop leaving things to the last minute and then rushing it and then being really poor with time. You know, ironically, I mean, I was late today because of the traffic. You know, I'll sort of give myself a pass, right? But I did leave very, very early with more than enough time. But the gods were on my side. But anyway, besides the point, I always had this feeling of like, in some ways, like, and someone used this term with me, which actually hurt me at the time, but it's actually true. There was a point in time where I just felt like my life was being held together by sticky tape. That's probably the best way of describing it.
Yeah.
It was a subconscious, general feeling that I just didn't have my shit together. I was bad with things like, you know, letting paperwork build up, not paying bills, letting things sit there, just being despondent to certain things and not really being good with administration and stuff like that. But when it came to the pointy end of stuff, when it came to running through a door and using weaponry and being with a bunch of guys and having a camaraderie, that was like, that's where I flourished. It was just all the other shit that I wasn't very good at. So anyway, when it came to the psychedelics side of things, the thing that got my attention was that certain types of psychedelics were apparently then good for focusing. So psilocybin, mushrooms, LSD, which I've never tried that, but mushrooms were the first thing. You know, psilocybin was the thing that got my interest. I thought maybe I could start microdosing with psilocybin. But then, me being me, I'm not the kind of person that likes to do things by halves. So the microdosing thing never ever happened. It just didn't. It doesn't really make any sense to me. And I know this is good for some people. It doesn't really feel right to me. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But that's what got my interest, the mushroom side of things. So I thought this will help me focus. So, you know, some time ago now, I started dabbling with mushrooms, and I found it, especially after a couple of sessions, I found that the aftermath was the bit that I noticed the most, because I found that I was waking up in the morning feeling like I'd slept really well, feeling sharper, feeling like I had less distractions, feeling like I could actually focus. And it was genuine, you know, it wasn't a placebo effect, because I didn't expect that. I wasn't planning for that. I hadn't heard that. I just thought it's going to affect you at the time, and then maybe over time you can then improve. But I was feeling effects the next day, and I'm talking like 1.5 grams of mushrooms, dry weight. That was kind of like the typical standard dose.
Yeah.
So I started doing that sort of on a sort of weekly to every 2 weeks basis, and it was really helping in between that time. So it's not like anything else when you take it and you feel like shit the next day. You know, alcohol I pretty much don't drink now, but I won't ban myself completely. But if I was to have 3 pints of beer, I'm having a hangover the next day. If I have 2, I can still feel that I've had it. I'm very, very sensitive to alcohol. So I tend to just not go near it because it dulls your consciousness. So there's a massive difference here. One's completely dulling your consciousness, one's for escapism, and the other one is healing and raises your consciousness, your vibration, your abilities. So it's like it's a magic medicine, you know. The power of plants is unbelievably underrated because no one's ready to receive the information that it's actually we've been conned.
Yeah.
We've been fucking had by the powers that be. And I'm from the system. I come from the system, but I've also unplugged myself for the most part from the system because I can see through it.
Yeah, I was very anti-drug, like earlier in my life, in my teen. Like it was just the way I was raised with my dad. He was just like very like, if you take any drug, you're a drug addict. Like it's bad. So I was very much anti-drugs. Like I would drink a lot of alcohol, but
which is a drug.
Yeah, exactly. But it was never like my dad's classification of a drug was just like anything other than alcohol or smoking tobacco and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was out in Australia and like everyone was smoking weed and doing acid that I eventually was just like, do you know what? I'm going to give it a go. And then for me, it went a little bit too far. I just like every day, like smoking weeds and just smashing stupid amounts of LSD.
Yeah.
So it's kind of very unbalanced.
Okay.
With me, I find like in my sort of late teens, early 20s, I took a lot of LSD, like stupid amounts. And because I went to that level, I would feel crap the day after.
Oh, really?
I would feel awful.
Interesting,
like,
yeah.
My drive was gone. It was just like, I didn't really want to do anything. It was very much like, I just wanted to just exist. And like, I was like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't really push the business this hard and stuff like that. Then like a couple of years later, I think it was about 24, started doing mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first ever time I did mushrooms, it was so beautiful. Like I actually cried. It was in a hotel room in Amsterdam. I was by myself and it was beautiful. It was like profound. And I woke up the next morning and I was like so energized, like from waking up groggy, like, oh, I've got to get out of bed, like to like waking up and like, wow, I feel great.
Yeah.
And it's not, I wouldn't say it's like a placebo because you're not expecting that effect from it. It's just you wake up and you're like, wow, I feel great. I feel focused. I feel like I can get on with whatever is on for today. So I always say like people who ask me about mushrooms and like LSD's sort of like you chucked in a roller coaster and
12 hours.
Yeah. And you're just like, you got no say in it. You're going.
Yeah.
But with mushrooms, you're in like the driver's seat a bit more. And you can navigate through things. Yeah. That is true. That is true. But it's with mushrooms, there's a lot more. I don't know. It feels like it's just natural, like beautiful. I did some. I think it was earlier on this year, and that was actually like to do some work in my mind, and it was like it was coming. I was just like, I could feel it coming. I was just like, you got some shit to work through. Here it is. And I worked through it, and in the morning it was great. It was like, you know, I felt more like me again.
It clears the pipes. It clears everything out.
Yeah, 100%.
It declutters you.
Yeah, and it's just again like with the energy levels because I work long hours and I hate it, and I hate getting up in the morning because I've just got no energy. And you're like, I'm gonna get an early night tonight, and then it's like 12 o'clock at night. Yeah, you're like, God damn it. And then the cycle starts all over again. So for me, like mushrooms was like a cycle breaker.
Yeah.
So just quickly get in there. Like, right, I'm energized now. I'm going to go to bed at the right time.
Yeah.
And it's just like bringing your life back on track.
Absolutely. And it's part of the path. I mean, I think with anything, you have to give it respect. And this is the thought that I have on it. You know, anything I've ever done, I'm big on personal development. I'm big on trying to better myself and, you know, being fit and healthy and feeding myself the right food and getting the right types of training in, sleep. I'm big on, that's what I do. It's high performance type stuff, and it's what I coach in. So it is essentially a huge part of my life. But when it comes to, I think the misinterpretation with certain types of like plant medicine, psychedelics, is that it's the relationship with it. It's the relationship in the either intention or lack thereof from the individual. So I always think that if you're using something for escapism, it's a drug, because they are drugs. There's not. You can pick a mushroom out of the ground and you can eat it, and it's a fungus, right? But it's essentially, the main ingredient is a drug that can have profound effects. However, when someone's using it for escapism and they're doing it to get away from their life, I term that as a drug. It's for the wrong reasons you're doing it. Whereby, if you're taking it because you're on a spiritual path or a healing journey, and you're trying to be a better human being, that's a medicine. It's a healing medicine then. And it all comes down to how you use it and how you approach it. And I think you have to give, it annoys me actually when people say things, if you hear people in conversations say, I was in the piss in Amsterdam and I got a load of mushrooms and we got fucking offered tits and mushrooms. Like that's disrespecting the plants. And it's not with any sort of introspective intention. It's just to escape from your life. And I don't agree with that. I think it's bad. It's misuse of something. But yeah, I mean, my mushroom journey started, and then I did only mushrooms for some time. Then I did like what's termed as you probably heard of it, a heroic dose, which is 5 grams and above. And that was really that was like the code breaker for me initially, because that gave me some seriously profound effects. I remember the first time when I took a heroic dose, which was like about 5 grams, I went into another, deep state. I was in another realm almost, and I had strong visualizations of things like, I felt like I was talking to my dad from the other side. I was getting very clear telepathic messages, and they were accurate because they followed on from that all the way through to my ayahuasca San Pedro journey. And it was always things like, stop taking yourself so seriously, stop thinking you have to prove things, that's your ego, all these things that really resonated with me. And there were things that I didn't really like about myself, so I was in denial. If someone was to tell me you've got a massive ego, or someone told me that I take myself too seriously, I wouldn't like to hear that news, because if someone was, but it was usually people who were really close to me who would say that. And I would be really hurt by it because I didn't really want to accept the truth, but it was true.
Yeah.
I learned that eventually it was actually true. And it was holding me back. That's the thing. You realise that you're trying to, I was trying to make everything a fight all the time. The Modern Warrior Project, it's a fitting term, but I've got a different way that I think about it now. And it wasn't the initial reason that I termed my coaching program as the Modern Warrior Project, because at the time when I named that project, I was all about the warrior and the spirit of the warrior, and they're making everything, the battle, the fight, and wage war on your fucking six pack, and it's the way that you talk to yourself is really important, because you then make that your reality. So if you're making everything a fight, everything's going to be a struggle, because that's how you relate to it. If you think of 2 people dancing, if you think of 2 people, a man and a woman doing the waltz, it flows. One leads, one follows, and it turns it into a dance, a beautiful dance, because you've each got a part to play, the yin and the yang. The positive, the negative charge. It's how the universe works. And if you get that right and the balance is right, things flow. If there's 2 positive charges trying to get together, it's not going to be very, very much the same. It's going to be a fight. It's going to be a struggle. People are always... So you're kind of doing that with your ego. When you make it a fight, when you make it a struggle, it's with yourself. And until you let that flow, it's always going to be a fight.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I love about mushrooms is it just gets rid of your ego. Like, your ego is pretty much gone, especially when you go, again, like you say, to the heroic doses, like you have the death of the ego. Yeah,
I mean, it's quite an extreme level to go to get a complete ego death, but I mean, I think you need an ego to a point. It's there for a reason, but I think it's a case of controlling it. And it's a bit like, your ego's a bit like dopamine. Like, dopamine's a great servant, but a terrible master.
Yeah.
One of my former clients actually told me that saying, and I loved it, and I use it all the time now. And it's so true. It's a great servant, but a terrible master. If you let your monkey brain run you, your ego run you, you're going to have a fucking challenging time.
Yeah. And it's again like people like scrolling on social media, like procrastination is like they want in that dopamine hit. So it's just anything to give them that dopamine hit.
And you got to ask questions where that comes from. Why? Do you procrastinate?
All the time.
Yeah, a lot of people
all the time. Yeah.
I still do it, but I'm so much better at it now because of things that I've learned. But there are reasons why people procrastinate, especially when it comes to chronic procrastinators. Like I was a chronic procrastinator, not just a little, but I used to chronically procrastinate, and that was the dark side of myself that I didn't want anyone to know. So I'm on a podcast now that's going to go out live to potentially how many listeners do you get? Thousands?
I think last month we hit 11,000 views.
Exactly. So I'm not shy to say this is the dark side of my personality that I think it's really, really important to tell the truth. Whether it's watching too much pornography, whether it's procrastinating too much, whether it's eating stuff that you shouldn't eat and pretending that you don't, whether it's not following through in the things that you say you're going to do, we've all done that. Problem is, when it comes to things like social media, we never talk about that. We show all the stuff that we like people to see, the shiny part, the angel side of your life, not the demonic side, the dark side. We've all got a dark side. And if you don't accept it or let it flow through you, if you don't accept it and then sit with it and let it go, release it, you're always going to be fighting with it. And it's 100%. Always going to get the better because there's like a lot of gremlins coming in. You're trying to get shit done, and before you know it, the gremlins are going, we want to do this instead. Just wait a little bit longer. But this is to do with stagnant energy that you've got built up. And I had a shit ton of that until very recently that I found out. Yeah. And I found out with some serious lessons along the way. But there was a good saying that I heard. It was my friend Kylie Ryan, who's a phenomenal mindset coach. She says to me during the conversation, she says, look, when it comes to procrastination, she said that if you think of the two words wait and wait, so as in waiting for something and then the physical weight of something, she says the amount of time that you're waiting to do something. So when you procrastinate, you're essentially putting something off. You're waiting to do the thing that you should be doing and you're doing something else instead. So the more time that there's a correlation between the amount of time that you wait and the amount of weight that you have holding you down. And that comes down to stagnant energy, trauma, inner child type stuff. And we've all got that for whatever reason. And it can be, mine was a deep job. I can go into that in a bit more depth as well.
So we've got 1 minute left. We've fired through this.
So we didn't really go into the ayahuasca thing and stuff. But I mean, the ayahuasca journey brought all this out. Between ayahuasca and San Pedro, it was like pieces of a puzzle without the box to look at. And that was someone that over there, Gogol Carey, that gave me that analogy. It's like getting all these pieces to a puzzle and not really knowing how to fit together or relate to each other. But the more you go down that rabbit hole, you start to get a picture. You start to see the picture, and you can then relate the pieces of the puzzle together, and then you can get a good idea of your life. Yeah. So I mean, ayahuasca and San Pedro, the whole journey of psychedelics that I've recently gone through has been life-changing, to say the least. Yeah, absolutely.
You've just got to go down the rabbit hole to begin with.
Yeah, you've got to venture down that rabbit hole. Yeah. Follow the white rabbit.
That's perfect. Lovely stuff. Thank you for that, Lindsay.
No worries. Welcome.